Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Mary Hums from Louisville University. The reason I invited Mary to this is the first issue of the Pee Wee Reese chapter, their first newsletter. Mary had an article in there about sports management and that she had a baseball course that she taught. And the whole sports management thing intrigues me. It's 20 years ago, lacrosse had a program because we had interns when I was with the Mailers as a host family, but they're all over and how sports management has exploded. And then to have a course where you're teaching about baseball really intrigued me because how can you teach a course on baseball to people who may know about baseball, or are they kids who don't follow baseball and it's a whole new experience? So I just saw a lot of opportunities to have an interesting conversation. So that's the reason for the meeting tonight. So Mary, thank you for joining us.
You are very welcome. And I look forward to any and all questions. I like when we spoke before, as we were getting things set up, Dennis said, what kind of format do you want to use? Use a presentation or PowerPoint? I'm like, man, let's have questions and answers. That's what I want to really hear about. So, and have good baseball conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it.
Questions. Yeah. And then Mary and I were exchanging emails off and on in the last month or so on this. So we've been talking some baseball back and forth too. So we may do some of that talking baseball as well, the rules and things, as that would be fun. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody, SABR 51 is coming up, and we're just about 3 weeks, a little over 3 weeks to the deadline on the early bird special. So if you're thinking of going to the convention, now's the time to get registered so you get the better pricing. And there are hotel rooms still available at the Palmer House. So if you're thinking of going, now's the time to get registered for that. And then one of the things that we in Milwaukee have, and I'm going to be in Milwaukee ahead of time, is that we're close. And not only are we close, but we can take the train, don't have to drive. And that makes that a whole lot more convenient. I know in 2015, when we had the convention, Bob, Rick, and I, we all went down on the train. It was a whole lot more convenient than driving into Chicago and parking a car. So that's things to think about. So the sooner the later that you register, better from a room standpoint. So we've got that. Let me introduce Mary. Mary sent me her university bio. University bios like to talk about everything their staff is doing. Every professor does. So she's very, very, very accomplished. She's done all kinds of writing, all kinds of things. It's very impressive. Anybody wants a copy, I'll be glad to share it. It was a page and a half. I can't imagine half. Someone who need to understand it was so deep. But just some basics on Mary. She's a professor in sports administration at the University of Louisville. She holds a PhD in sports management from Ohio State. She also attended Iowa and University of Notre Dame for other degrees as she worked her way to that point. She has been recognized with numerous awards, including international recognition, and has twice been invited to the White House before 16. So Mary has been active in the Olympics. She in representing the U.S. In an educational session in 2016, I think, was it? Yeah. And then Paralympic Games. And she even moved to Athens, I think, in 2004, working both the Olympic softball and Paralympic goalball games. So she's been very, very active with that. She has contributed to a number of scholastic journals as well as a baseball research journal. I do have a question on that. And I was going to ask if you ever wrote any baseball, and I saw that. I thought, okay, we know you wrote baseball, so good. She's made over 200 presentations of various scholarly associations, both in the U.S. and abroad. Her main research interest is policy development in sports organization, especially in regards to inclusions of people with disabilities in all sport and human rights. She was a co-contributor to Article 30.5 of the 2006 United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And as an advocate for people with disabilities in sport, Hums has played a role in advancements, including Major League Baseball's changing the name of the disabled list to the injured list, and establishing the ESPYs for best male and female athlete with a disability. And establishing the International Day of Sport for Development and Peace. So you've kept yourself busy.
I have. I always like to tell people I never got cheated.
Yeah.
I took advantage of the opportunities that were presented to me, and was very glad I did, and always had great colleagues to support me, and great colleagues to work with all along the way. So it's been a good ride. It really has been. It's been a lot of fun. It's been busy, and it brings me now, since post, we're not really post pandemic, but as the pandemic eases off a bit, now I live in Zoom world. So I used to put stickers on my passport, but now I've made like a Zoom passport, and I put stickers on of all the places I get to go now. So it's pretty cool.
That's a neat idea.
Yeah.
And then that she can do more than just talk about sports. She's a letter winner in field hockey at the University of Notre Dame. It's a 1996 inductee in the ASA Indiana Softball Hall of Fame, and 2009 inductee in the Marion High School in Mishawaka,
Yep.
Indiana,
Yeah.
Athletic Hall of Fame. So
Mishawaka is right next door to South Bend. If you all know where South Bend, probably a lot of you know where South Bend is, because that's where Notre Dame is, of course. Like one side of the street is South Bend, and the other side of the street is Mishawaka.
Oh, really?
So that gives you a little geographical context to it. Yep.
Cool. So couple of questions. I like to start out usually with an icebreaker. And one that I've been using as of late, I used to ask what your first baseball memory is, and most people know that one, so they're all prepared for it. So I like to see if I can get one I can catch them a little off guard and do a little thinking, because they always get interesting answers. If you could have a time machine moment with a baseball event or a ball player you would like to go back in the past to see, what would it be?
And is this addressed to everyone or to me?
To you.
Oh, to me.
We know a lot of theirs.
Oh, okay. All right. You already know these. Right. What would it be?
Yeah.
I would want to go to the first game that Jackie Robinson played for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Yeah.
That would be where I would go. I think that would come to me pretty quickly there. That is where I would want to be.
Yeah.
And maybe a second one would be getting to see Satchel Paige pitch for the first time for the Cleveland Indians. I think those would be pretty fantastic.
That old man Satchel Paige when he was Cleveland. Yeah.
The rocking chair, right? Yeah. Give Bill Veeck, get him a rocking chair, put it in the bullpen.
Yeah. Next question then is, I mentioned that you wrote for the Baseball Research Journal. What did you write for the journal or the BRJ?
I'm trying to remember which. It's hard to keep track here of which one that was. I think that was the. I think that was the one on the disabled list.
Yeah, the title was "What's in a Name: Examining Reaction to Major League Change."
Yeah, I'm sorry that sometimes I forget when I wrote things. But yeah, that was okay. Should I tell you a little bit about that then? About that article?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Okay, so and I'll give you all the background story as well. I worked for many years, over 20 years, with my friend. I'll just say this: my friend Eli Wolf. We worked together for over 20 years. Unfortunately, we lost Eli last week. He had a cardiac arrest and passed. So it's a little fresh for me yet, but I love talking about what we did together. But 15 years ago, Eli and I, who were both disability sport advocates, decided that why is it the disabled list? They're not disabled, they're injured. So we wrote a letter to Bud Selig. Right? What do? You write a letter to Bud Selig. We still have a copy of it too. We wrote a letter to Bud Selig and just suggesting that perhaps we could change that. And got a nice letter back, kind of a form letter, dear Dr. Hams and Mr. Wolf, thank you for your letter and your interest. It's something we'll consider, sort of like have a nice day, goodbye. I mean, that was sort of what it was. We'll be in touch, right? And every few years, Eli and I would sort of, poke the snake with a stick a little bit. And eventually what turned the tide for us was that we got some backing from the Ruderman Foundation, which is a pretty well-heeled disability rights organization out of Boston, that they threw some support behind us. But then Major League Baseball hired Billy Beane in the commissioner's office. Now, there's two Billy Beanes. Who knew, right? We all know that, but there's two Billy Beanes. Not Moneyball Billy Beane, but Billy Beane, the guy who is like the vice president in the commissioner's office, and he works with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, we finally got someone in the inner orbit, and that's what made the difference. But it took 15 years, and we weren't proposing any changes in the policy. We weren't proposing any changes in the rules. We just wanted to change the word disability to injured, because we're like, people, they may become disabled, but at the time they're injured. So we just didn't like, it's not that we were offended by the word disability. Believe me, I'm not easily offended by things at all, but we wanted to change that. And so, and to get more in line with the other big four, like football and hockey and basketball, who didn't use the word disability either. But that one change took 15 years. So that's the backstory. The article then, what we decided to do was, I have a colleague who does social media research. He studies what people say on Twitter and other social media platforms. So we decided to look at the Twitter posts in the 48 hours, because typically that's pretty quick for things like this. You get a pretty quick hit of people's reactions. And we analyzed about 1,000 tweets, I think it was, where people either commented or retweeted or whatever about the change. And that's what that article was about, some of the themes that we found. And I'll let you guess. People overwhelmingly, what do you think? I'm going to give you a choice. Either they liked it or they didn't like it. So everybody who thinks that people liked the change, raise your hand. Okay. Those of you who think that people didn't like the change, raise your hand. Yeah. And then there was kind of this group that's a wee bit neutral, or at least they weren't in favor. So it was not overwhelmingly received by whoever those people are on Twitter, right, in the Twitterverse. But that's what we wrote about, and we analyzed all these tweets, and some of them were bombastic. Some of the very supportive ones were things like, well, of course it makes sense. Why haven't we done this sooner? And some of the ones that were opposed were actually quite, I don't want to say shocking, because nothing should shock you in Twitter, right? But the vitriol of some people, and I don't know, Dennis, if it's appropriate for me to use the language that some people use. Is it appropriate for me, this group, where I can?
We're amongst adults.
Okay,
I don't know what cat is, but
okay, yeah. So it got things. There was comments like, whoever did this, I hope you choke on a donut and die. Really? And then someone else is like, what fucking snowflake came up with this idea? So I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I mean, but the vitriol that came out, it's like, I don't understand that. And then there were just people who are like, oh, just leave it be. Why should we change it? It's always been this way. And we're just, felt that way. So we got a little bit of everything, but it really was an interesting study to sort of get your finger on the pulse of the generic fan who would be a Twitter user. So that's the backstory. And anybody that wants to talk about that either the backstory of how it happened over the 15 years or the article itself, I will gladly talk about it. So now you know the rest of the story.
Yeah. I will add on the newsletter, I'll add a copy of the article in the newsletter that goes out.
Excellent.
On that.
Excellent.
So with that, yeah. And I'm sure there's also baseball fans who just a definition of change is impossible. And so, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. And of course, we have no way to get demographics, so we don't know if older fans, male fans, female fans, younger fans, because you can't get that off Twitter. So we just knew that this is what the Twitter respondents said to it. It was an interesting study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an interesting article, I think, and it was not only an interesting article, but made you think. I guess that's always dangerous, but yeah.
I left the snowflake quote out of the article, I think. Yeah. I use that for different consumption, but yeah.
As I think as we were chatting, I was mentioning how I think sports management programs have just kind of boomed all over the place. 20 years ago, University of La Crosse had a program going. We had some interns out of La Crosse for the Madison Mallards when I was a host family there. But I don't know of a lot of universities having them. And now there's multiple universities all over the country offering these programs.
There are literally hundreds now of colleges and universities that have sport management programs. Sometimes they call them sport management, sport administration, sport leadership. But there are literally hundreds. Some of them, the newer ones now are housed in business schools, as before maybe they were in colleges of education and human development. Also, the numbers internationally, the number of countries internationally that have sport management programs has taken off as well. So we're getting a lot of people that are coming out with degrees in sport management. Of course, it doesn't assure a job, but it certainly does help, because basically what you're learning is business principles applied to sport. Think when you were in school, and I don't know how many of you, when you were in school, you studied, I was a business management major, but we were learning about widgets. I don't even know what a widget is, but I would think about, my goodness, what if as an undergrad, I could have talked about sport? Think about how much more we would get engaged, right? And how much more interesting it would be to use sport as the venue, as opposed to whatever that. To me, a widget is like a wing nut. Everybody I ask people what's a widget, they all tell me it's something different. So I don't know what it was, but it's great now that we can use sport. And the other thing about sport management programs and teaching sport management is you never have to make anything up. Everything really happens. So examples in class or case studies or class discussions, I don't have to make up stories. All I have to do is look online and or watch ESPN, and there you go. You're all set.
I can't imagine adding sports to my accounting degree would have made it a whole lot more interesting. Yeah, so,
Okay, I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
But that's true. And then out of that, did you design this baseball management course?
Yeah, that was my own creation.
Yeah.
When I came to the University, I've been at the University of Louisville just over 25 years now. And I came here from, I've been a couple of places. I'd been at Kennesaw State University. Well, I'd been at St. Mary of the Woods College as an athletic director first. And then I went back and got my PhD. I was at Kennesaw State for a couple of years in UMass Amherst. Then I came to Louisville. And I had the opportunity, we needed some more elective courses for the students. And everybody knew, like, oh, Mary's a big baseball fan. And I said, yeah, how about if I teach a baseball class, management and of professional baseball? And so I started it, however many, I haven't been teaching it for 20 years. I haven't been teaching it the whole time I've been here. I was at Louisville a couple more years, got my feet wet here before I was able to do that. But then, yeah, I created it. And over time, it has morphed. And really changed, quite a bit. It used to be in person. Now I teach it online, and there's advantages and disadvantages because it's what they call asynchronous. So I don't have a live audience. Every stuff is pre-recorded. We put it up, and the students watch it on a schedule. But it has allowed me, and even those last couple of years in person, when we used to do Skype. I don't remember Skype, Dolly, and early Zoom days. That we could bring people in from the industry to our classes. Now we can bring them in from everywhere. And so the students really get the opportunity to learn from a lot of industry professionals. So yeah, I created it and molded it and, have changed it over time. And it's been a lot. It's a hard class to teach in some ways, but it's a really fun class to teach.
You designed it to look like 9 innings.
Pretty much.
And that was the purpose behind it, how you designed it.
Yep. And we have usually we're like on a 15-week semester, so you have to kind of make it fit that. But the way I set things up, yeah, it's kind of like that because a lot of times there are just 1-week units, but some of the early stuff there's a couple week units that go together. But that is about what it breaks down to. Yep. Subtle.
Yeah. Well,
know what I did there, didn't you?
How many students take 14 weeks to figure out that you did it in 9 innings? But yeah,
not very many.
And have the courses changed over time?
Yes, they have, because the topics have changed.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that makes it different, I only teach it every other year, so that there's always change every 2 years. But the content certainly changes because, for example, as we go through the collective bargaining process, the issues that are being dealt with on the business side, because it is basic. I mean, it's a business class. It's not. We're not. Yes, we have fun talking about baseball and about players and stats and all that, but it's a business class, and so we're talking about what's happening in the industry. So the issues change with the collective bargaining agreements. The issues change with finances, with broadcast deals. Of course, look what's going on now, right, with Bally, things we have to think about there. With sponsorship and naming rights changing on stadiums when companies, come and go, perhaps through financial difficulties. So the topics do change over time. And I added some topics that I didn't have early on, like I added. I had early on. I did talk quite a bit about, not quite a bit, but not as much as I do now about like Negro League baseball. I do that a lot more, and was really excited to have Bob Kendrick. I think you all know Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro Leagues Museum, had him on as a guest. We have a class cast. It's called From the Diamond to the Desk, where I interview people, and so he came on and talked. So the topics have changed. Women in baseball has changed as we've seen more more women move up in different positions throughout baseball. So it does morph over time, but there's some certain topics that we keep. The minor leagues. Look how the minor leagues have changed. But we'll talk about the minor leagues and talk to people who work in the minor leagues. And we talk to everybody from the Louisville Bats to the Savannah Bananas, and everybody in between.
Yeah, when I looked at the list, I thought looking at the one area would have changed a lot just in the last couple of years was women in baseball. What, 5 years ago, did we have any women or hardly any women involved in professional baseball at all? And now we have one woman who just is managing at the high A level, actually managing. So it's nice to see the change.
Well, yeah, and you see, of course, the Marlins with Kim Ang as the GM, and I think it's O'Connor who's the president. So that makes them the only team, obviously, that has both a GM and a female GM and a female president. So yeah, that's changed a lot. And it's interesting. Earlier on in my career, I wrote an article about women working in the management of professional baseball, and about how women got to their jobs in baseball. And it certainly has changed since then. But that was actually the first baseball themed article that I wrote. And that was, it was prompted by an article in Baseball America that featured, it was called, this is probably, when would I have got written that? Maybe 15 years ago. It was called the 10 Most Powerful Women in Baseball, or something like that. And I can't even remember who they all were now, because it's all changed. But one thing they asked the women that worked in baseball was, how did you get your job? I'll let you guess. How do you think the women, maybe 15 years ago, how do you think they got their jobs in baseball? Anybody want to take a guess?
Relative?
No, relative. They either married somebody or they inherited it. And when I read that article, I'm like, wait, no, what? No, that's not true. It was true for them, but that's not the only way women can get to work in baseball. They can become managers, and they can be trained just like anybody else. And of course, that's what we're seeing now. And they can work their way up like Kim Ang did, through the Yankees and the White Sox and the Dodgers. And learning, apparently her expertise area early on was waivers. Anybody who can explain waivers, that's like unraveling a plate of spaghetti. But what I've read about her is that was an area of expertise for her. So yeah, so it definitely has changed.
Yeah, and it took her, and they were saying 10 years ago she should be a GM, or 12 years ago. It took forever, but as we know, minorities always take much longer and have to do a lot more to get to that point. And she was well qualified. So
she really was. You look at her, talk about a resume there. Holy cats, it's pretty amazing. And I've never met her. I've never had the opportunity, but I'm hoping to get her maybe next time I teach the class to do an interview. That would be awesome.
That was one of I looked at the list of names that you gave me. I took just some of the list of names, and these are not easy people to get, and you can get them to come for this course. That in itself is amazing. Yeah,
some of them, there were some that I had some connection to. There were some that were absolute 100% cold call, just absolutely 100% cold call. Or I reached out. Some people ghosted me. Their names are not on there, of course. Some people simply didn't have time, and I get it, because it's a spring course and people are gearing up for spring training. And so sometimes it's hard to get people, and I get that. But some people are really great. The one person who really was a cold call was Jessica Mendoza, and who's, of course, an ESPN announcer, right? The way, and I'll tell you the hook on it. If I could tell the story on the hook on getting Jessica Mendoza, was that when I worked the Olympic Games in Athens in 2004, I was a groundskeeper, and I did dirt. Okay, they put me on the tractor like once, and they're like, yeah, maybe not. I said, okay, so I did dirt, but we maintained a competition field and 2 practice fields for those Olympic Games. And my job we took care of all the practice facilities, like I say, in between games. But on game day, I made the batter's boxes for every single softball game for the 2004 Olympic Games. Well, that was the year that Jessica Mendoza won a gold medal. So I sent her. I wanted to get her to come to class. One of my students said, "Dr. Helms, do you follow her on Twitter?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Send her a message. It's Dr. Helms. It's the year 2020. Send her a message on Twitter." I'm like, "Okay, Nick, I'll do that." So I did, and in the message I put about the class, and then I said, "Oh, by the way, the year you won the gold medal in 2004 in Athens, I was one of the 4 American groundskeepers that took care of the softball stadium." She got back to me the next day. And she's like, "This is so awesome. I can't believe it." She's like, "What are you doing on Thursday at 1:00?" I'm like, "Interviewing you, I guess." And we just set it up. So sometimes things like that just kind of fall from the sky. And other times you have to chase people down. Sometimes they were students that I taught, like Chris Antonetti, I taught him, and Ben from the GM for the Pirates now, Charrington. I taught him as well. So occasionally, your students make it big time and they remember their professor, and that's always so kind.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, I'm not afraid to ask.
Yeah. And the other question I have when you mentioned women in baseball, do you ever tie FA Manly to the women in baseball and the Negro Leagues? Have you ever tried tying that together?
I have, yes, in a couple of ways. And one is that, of course, we made sure that when Bob came and talked for the Bob Kendrick from the Negro Leagues Museum he talked about FA Manly, and then the students they always get a research paper to write, right, and they get assigned a topic. And and I have 45 students and I have 45 topics, right? So they all get something different. But I make sure that FA Manly is in there so that at least one student will get to learn about her. But I had Lisa Heafy. I hope I say her name
Leslie.
right. Leslie Heafy, yeah, from Kent State, came and talked about women in baseball, and she talked a lot about FA Manly. So I made sure that got covered, because you know what, FA Manly really is the first modern day female sport manager. She really is, and so the students got to learn about her through Leslie, and in the past I would talk about it, but Leslie's that's her bag, so she did a great job. So I do tie that in, of course.
Yeah. Well, someone in a busy. I get caught busy listening. If anybody was trying to sign in, if you're coming in late and you don't get in right away, I get caught up with asking questions and I don't pay attention to the screen. So Manly, sorry if you've been there a while. I looked at that list there. I looked at the classes and everything, and that's really what I found interesting. And I've got one more question. I don't want to be the only one asking questions here, because I know the people I know who are on here are really good at questions. The history of professional baseball, how far back do you go with the history?
I go back to, and you all are more history people than I am, and history is not necessarily, I'm more strong on the business end. We of course talk about the New York Knickerbockers and the first games and early times, and Abner Doubleday and Cartwright, and who really invented baseball, that whole discussion. So we do go pre-Civil War with it, and talking about the National Association of Professional Baseball Players, and how that was a loose association, and we don't have the National League until 1876, and talk a lot about how the Civil War spread the game. One of the things that I cover in class is about American baseball, how baseball is tied to American culture, and that includes patriotism and our military culture, but how the Civil War helped to spread the game across the country. So we go back, that far, and then of course get more heavy into the organization and the professionalization of the game when we have the founding of we have, of course, the Cincinnati Red Stockings, and then the founding of the National League. And it's kind of a trivia question that students have to kind of look up, and then I tell them about Louisville was an original signatory in the National League. We are not in the National League now, and of course, ask the students what happened. Well, we were the first big, we were maybe the first big gambling scandal, right? And so we're not in the National League anymore. Yeah. So they always find that kind of amusing. So I go back, that far and touch on that. And typically the students, what I find is the students today some of them like history and some of them don't. but I try to emphasize the story part of history to make it interesting for them.
Yeah, when you say that about students not liking history, for us on here, we all go, how can you say that?
Yeah, I know. It hurts our heart. Yeah.
And I have a goddaughter who is very, very smart. And she would say, the only class I hate is history. And I kept telling her, I'm just going to disown you, but I never did. And we still have that argument. But it just, the history of baseball is just fascinating to people like us.
Yeah.
And to them, it's probably boring. So there's a lot of, although the business setup and everything, how it was organized, if you're going to be a business manager in baseball, just understanding that foundation is probably important.
Well, and one of the things that I do is I use baseball as an opportunity then for them to learn about unions and the union movement in the United States, the formation of unions, how unions operate, how like the NLRA and NLRB, so that they learn, it's a little bit about antitrust, they learn about the Sherman Act, just basics. Some of that they get in their legal aspects of sport class as well, but really tying it to baseball and showing them how and talking to them about unions. And I will put this on the table for all of you, and I put it on the table for them. When it comes to union and management, although I teach sport management, I tend to fall on the union side in a lot of topics. So I always give them my bias. Said, if you hear my bias, this is why. And the reason, and I'll also tell you why the reason I'm biased. My dad worked for the post office for 31 years. So he was a union guy all those years. And when Dad passed, Mom didn't have to worry about anything, because the union took care, right? So I always put that up front, is to sort of I lean a little bit that direction. But it helps them to learn, a legal aspect then, doesn't it? Because they learn about the formations of unions, how unions operate. So it's a nice teaching tool for that, because if you just tell a class, hey, we're going to learn about unions, they'd be like, oh, but we're going to learn about baseball unions. Oh, okay. And Marvin Miller, right? And Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally. That makes it a little more palatable to them. So, it's a vehicle for learning a business concept.
Is there any way we can just sneak in and watch the class? Just everything about the class sounds interesting. So,
thank you. Well, sign up. I wish I could. There are sometimes I can share some of the time into the desk, but sometimes I have guests who are like, "Is this only for class consumption and not public?" And I have, they ask, and because they might answer their questions, differently than if it was for the public.
Yeah. Anybody have a question out there? I can keep walking the conversation.
Yes, I do actually. I'm interested in knowing, Mary, for your sports management program, how does your course fit into it? Like, what other courses do the students take? Do you have prerequisites to your course? Is your course a prerequisite to something else?
Okay, so this course is an elective. We have required, our required curriculum includes things like sport finance, sport marketing, legal aspects of sport, sport facility management, event management, sport governance, which is my other area, sport governance, sport communications. So we have, and then internship, of course. That's the core required courses. This is an elective. So I teach this as an elective. I also teach international sport, but we've got electives just across the board. We've got electives on like name, image, and likeness, electives on race and sport, elective on women in sport. We've got electives on like college athletics and finance. So it's an elective. It is also what's called a 500 level course. So you have to either be an upper level undergrad, so either a junior or a senior as an undergrad, or you can also take the class as a graduate student. So the prereqs are that you have to have a certain amount of hours in the program, and you have to basically be either a junior, senior, or a graduate student in order to sign up for the class. And it's offered, like I say, it's offered every odd spring. So like 21, 23, and 25 again, because I teach the international class every Olympic year, which is every even year or even spring. Does that address it, Mike?
Yes. So it sounds like the major is built over multiple departments and even colleges.
No, this is our sport man. These are all sport management classes. We at the University of Louisville, we have over 500 students in our sport management program. And we have undergraduates, masters, and PhD students. We have online and we have in person. So we're pretty well staffed in terms of faculty. So these are classes that are all sport administration. The ones I've named are all sport administration classes. So they're all housed within our program.
Okay,
And we're in the Department of Health and Sports Sciences, which also has exercise science and physical education teacher prep, and then sport administration.
okay. That's the same place that our sports management program is housed. So I had one more question. I don't want to bore people. Do you help the students get internships, or are they all on their own to try and find them?
We have a couple of our faculty members, that's their job. They oversee the internship program. So it is a collaborative process. The students, will have an interest area, and then the faculty members who specialize in, we have a giant data bank, as you can imagine, of internship sites all around the country and some internationally as well. So we try to make sure that students are a good fit, and that the organization is a good fit. Some of them, we have, for example, of course, we send a lot of people to the Louisville Bats, which is, the AAA affiliate of the Reds right here. And we send a lot of people to Racing Louisville and FC Louisville, which are the soccer clubs. Because we have in the Louisville Sports Commission, we have ongoing relationships with them. But then we also have ongoing relationships with, the PGA and Churchill Downs and Kentucky Derby, and other, sport organizations just all over the place. So we have a pretty wide reach. And then, of course, when your students graduate and they get hired, then they need interns. And so we hope, as they do, that they remember us, and then that makes the network grow.
Hi, Mary, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Were you raised in a sports family?
Was I raised in a sports family? The answer is yes. I have, and let me tell you. So I have two older brothers, Ed and Steve. Ed played, he was not an athlete when he was younger, but he took up hockey as an adult. All right, he became a hockey player. Steve was a pretty decent baseball and softball player. My dad was a baseball and softball player, because when my dad was young, softball for men, fast pitch, was of course a lot more popular. So my dad played baseball and softball, and by all accounts, he was pretty good. He by the time we arrived as kiddos, he had retired, but he played locally, and occasionally, I guess, other teams would pick him up to play, right, for them, because I guess he was pretty good. He told stories. He occasionally would play under assumed names in other towns because they would come and pick him off. What was the one? Oh, of course, our last name is Hums, Hums. It's a pretty German sounding name, and Dad's name was Herman. But there was one team that was a Polish team that picked him up, and they had to call him Herman Humsevich. I'm like, Dad, the Humsevich, okay, but the Herman part, that's not really working with the Polish community. But he played under Herman Humsevich. So he and my dad, I tell you, he hit ground balls to us, ground balls to me, and fly balls to my brother for hours. He'd come home from work. We lived out in the country. We had just an open field, not a baseball field or anything. Literally an open field that Dad just mowed. I mean, it was grass between our house and where Grandpa and Grandpa lived on the farm next door. And we played there. But Dad would hit balls to us, till it got too dark and we had to come in. And then my brothers and I, we would play. We'd play baseball. We'd play softball. We played a lot of wiffle ball, which I think made. I think wiffle ball made me a good hitter. I'm telling you the truth. Because if you can hit a wiffle ball, and my brother, they weren't messing around, okay? They put the spin on it, the whole thing. So we played that. We'd throw the football around in the winter. So it was very much a sporting. My mom was not, but Dad was, and Dad was also an athlete in high school. He ran track in high school, so we do have an athletic background. That's a great question. I haven't had a chance to talk about my dad like that in a long time. Thanks.
When a student goes into your program as a freshman, and I might say I missed the first 5 to 10 minutes of the meeting, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
What would be examples of courses they would take early on in your program?
Okay, so when they first start as first-year students and sophomores, they would of course be taking like the university general, English and math, all that. But with us, they would start out, we have a class called Principles of Sport Management, which is an introduction to the industry. So they would be taking that. They would also be taking issues in ethics in sport administration. Those are like the two basic classes. You have to take those and pass them before you can get admitted to the major. Then the next level up of classes, which would be the 300 level classes, would be sport marketing, sport governance. I think sport comm is a 300 level, sport leadership. So it's kind of the basics. And the 400, you get into sport law, sport finance, I think sport, and again, I can't remember, sport comm is a 300 or 400 level, and event management and facility management. So those would be
I guess I'm sorry, I guess the internships would be the fourth of the year or so. Is that correct?
That's right, yes. Before you could do an internship, you'd have to have there's a minimum number of hours that you would have to have completed in the program. And there's also like an internship prep class that goes along with it, so that like how to make sure that your resume is okay, and what to do on an interview, and all those basic job seeking skills. So that's also it's kind of a precursor to the internship. And I think the internship now is for a long time was 400 hours in a work.
And my last question, I guess, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but and Mike, who spoke a moment ago, might have familiarity with his program, of course, does have. But with so many sports management programs now among various colleges, do you in general just feel there's a wide variance in the quality of those programs? Or from your experience, and of course, I'm not asking you to name names, but or universities, but do you think that they're all pretty good, or are some much better than others?
Definitely some are better than others. And so the question, of course, would be what separates them, right? What makes some better than others? And this might sound self-aggrandizing, but there's a couple things. One is your faculty. And what I mean by that is take a look at the faculty who are teaching. Did they come from the industry? Okay. If they came from the sport industry, then they're teaching from their life experience, and they're bringing their connections to the classroom. It's not that they read a book the night before and they're talking about what they read in the book. They lived it. So, for example, on our staff, we have like our finance, and don't always have to work in sport. Our finance guy, he worked for 10 years as a financial consultant for General Electric. That's what he did. But we also had people who worked in marketing for St. Louis University. Our attorney on staff practiced contract law for 10 years. I was a college athletic director. See, Megan worked for someone worked for the WNBA in ticket sales. Evan worked in communications. So they come from all over. But so strength of faculty with industry experience, because then they're talking from experience, and then they can bring those connections to the classroom. And that makes a big difference as well, is who are you connected to, and what does your alumni network look like? So like our program has built up a pretty strong alumni network, as we also see at some of the other, more successful more successful leaders out there in the academic world. Does that answer?
Yes, it does. I appreciate that. Yes.
Well, then to follow up on Francis's question, the different levels, is there a group of the universities who offer sports management get together annually or semi-annually for meetings on, as a group of colleges doing this, just to share ideas?
There's a number of different ones. Our big one, so these are sort of your basic academic nerdy organizations, right? Yeah. We've got the North American Society for Sport Management. That's our biggest one. That's our flagship. So people who teach sport management we have an annual conference for that. But then we also have specialty groups. So there's the Sport Marketing Association. There's the Sport and Recreation Law Association. There is the Sport Communications. I think they're the Sport Communications Association. So there are some that are academically based, but then there are also ones that are industry based. So for example, there's NIRSA, which is the National Intramural Recreation Sports Association group. So people who work in campus rec, they have an annual meeting where practitioners and academics both come together. And then we also have the European Association of Sport Management, Play the Game, which is a Danish-based group. They're really great. They do a lot of governance and policy stuff, high-level stuff there, out of Denmark. There's the Keltner group out of Athens, Greece. So there are also international conferences as well. And there's like the Sportschule in Cologne, Germany, which is the German Sport Institute, basically, and they host a lot of events as well.
Very,
Get together.
that leads into a question I was just thinking of. I would imagine most of your graduates are placed in the United States.
Yeah.
Have you placed them into international sports organizations?
We have some, but we've placed more of them on the PhD level and master's level. So we've got a number, like our Japanese students, they all go back and get jobs in Japan, in the industry or as professors. As a matter of fact, one of our PhD grads, her name is Dr. Maki Ito, and I wrote another article that appeared in Nine. I know you're familiar with Nine. That was about Japanese women's baseball. But Dr. Ito is really connected in the baseball industry. She's a professor at Hosei in Tokyo, but she was, I think, the first female Olympic technical delegate for baseball to ever have that rank with the Olympic Games. She's worked with the national team, the women's national team over there, and a lot with women's baseball. But she also, it's just to tell a story about what one of our grads does. She's so connected in baseball that Hank Aaron, right, our home run king, there would be times that he would go to Japan, and he would have they would have like a I don't know what they called it, home run festival. It was Sadaharu O, okay? It was Sadaharu O. So Mr. Aaron and Mr. O would, kind of go around Tokyo or whatever, talking about baseball and home runs, and Dr. Ito would be their interpreter. So like she sends me pictures here. She's like, Dr. Hums, here I am at lunch with Mr. Aaron and Mr. O. How about that? That's pretty good. But she's but she is a professor. I can speak more to that on the PhD. I ran the PhD program for about 10 years. And we had a number of international students. And we had another baseball guy. He coaches baseball in Japan, as well as he still plays too. Trying to think. And one guy went over and he went into marketing. So we place them in different places. Some of our Canadians have stayed in the U.S. and worked. We don't have. We need to do better with getting more international students. We get some, but not as many as I would like, because I think they just really add so much to a program.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mary, is there a typical student? I almost hate to use the word typical, but does there seem to be a certain type of person who comes into the sports management, or is it a broad spectrum?
It's pretty broad. It does tend to be more men than women. Okay. On the undergrad level, I think we're probably at about 70% men, 30% women. On the graduate, at the master's level, we're a lot closer to 50-50. So by gender, there's a breakdown there. They tend to be primarily white, although we do have quite a few African American students in our program. And of course, being an urban institution in Louisville, we have a good size African American population in our city, and a lot of people come to Louisville from the area. We get people from all over the world, but we also, of course, get many local people. So that would be another group to look at. They tend to be sports fans, and we have to tell them, you got to take your fan hat off and put your manager hat on, because you aren't getting into sport management. You're not going to be hanging out with LeBron. LeBron is not even going to know who you are. We got to get them to realize that you're going to be behind the scenes. And we got to, they got to make that shift, right? From fan to manager. And sometimes when they're young, it's a little harder. You see them mature, right? But certainly a lot of sports fans come into the major. People often ask, do you have a lot of student athletes in the major? We do. They are not the majority of our majors, however, but we do have, of course, student athletes would be interested They're interested in our major. They're interested in exercise science a lot of times, and many of the other majors on campus like communication, criminal justice, marketing as well will draw a good number of student athletes, but they are not our primary population. So does that give you a kind of an idea? And they come from all over. They come from all over, which is wonderful. I know in our master's program for a long time, we were, I think that the one master's program on campus that had more non-Kentucky people than any of the other master's programs on campus. Now that's changed a little bit now, expanded probably with our online reach. So it's good group.
Yeah. How does the student take the fan's hat off now? Remember, you're in management, and the fan part's not. Do some go, oh, no?
Yeah, well, and that's what's going to separate who's going to get a job in sport and who isn't, because we tell them and try to reiterate it in all our classes. If you're, people say, if I could take this major, am I going to get a job, right? Because of course we want to know that. Their parents want to know that. Parents and guardians want to know that. We can't guarantee. We can't say that you will 100% get a job depending on what you do. If you don't do the right things, we can tell you 100% you're not going to get a job. That we can say, but we set you up as best you can. You know what makes the difference is a lot of times when they take that internship and they realize, hey, I'm like setting up sawhorses in the parking lot, or I'm selling hot dogs, or I'm shooting if I'm lucky, I'm shooting the hot dog cannon, at the minor league baseball game. But I think when they actually get into, hey, I have to be at this event at at 7:00 in the morning before anybody else is here, and I'm going to be here till 10 o'clock tonight, and that's my job, and nobody's here to see me, and I'm not going to even see an athlete because I'm at a registration desk all day. Reality sets in when they get that real world experience. It's a lot like when people do like student teaching. They think, oh, I want to be a teacher, right? And then they realize they go out for their student teaching, and it's like, I really don't like kids. So you find out that maybe you don't want to be a teacher, right? So it really comes with that experience, and that's what kind of separates the ones who are going to be more employable than the others.
But one of the good things on your program is you have internships where they get a chance to experience it before they get the degree and say, oh my God, I got a degree. When am I going to use it for? So that is an advantage.
Well, it is. And, it helps them with, as long as they realize that internship is a springboard, it's not just hours that you take to get a degree, but it's how do I use this to advance myself? What skills am I going to learn? Who am I going to meet? What connections am I going to make? How is this going to help my network? What can I bring to an organization? When you do an internship, you want to make sure that when you leave, they miss you. That they're like, you make yourself irreplaceable. Take initiative, and that's, some students are they can do that quite readily, and others struggle with that. Mm-hmm. And they have to realize that no job is too big and no job is too small in the sport industry.
I'd like to ask, do you have any idea of who gets hired after the internships? Because I know I worked for the Milwaukee Brewers with a lot of fabulous young people who wanted sports jobs eventually, and it's very, very competitive. I mean, it's tough, and a lot of the jobs pay low, and so I was wondering if you have statistics on how well they do after that, and also if you do any consulting for minor league or major league baseball.
Yeah, so in terms of the consulting, I know like our guys our marketing guys, they do a lot. They work with the bats, and they'll work with FC Louisville and Racing Louisville. So they do a lot of work with them. Other places I've been worked with Major League Baseball. They work with the NFL. Our students will send them to work at like the NFL draft. They'll work at the Super Bowl. So that they'll get connected. Somewhat that way with events. But so we do some consulting. I do work mostly with the disability sport community, nationally and internationally. Now, in terms of the numbers, I don't have the numbers. We do know that it's a lot easier to place a master's student than it is an undergraduate. Okay, because there are fewer of them, and that's a more select group to start with. The undergrads, again, there's hundreds of them, and some undergrads take our major and they don't even want to work in the industry. They just want to get a degree. It sounds cool. I need a degree to get a job, right? Any place, and we're okay with that. We'd rather that you are a solid citizen and make a contribution that way to society, even if you're not working in sport. Maybe you take over your parents' business. That's cool. You learn business concepts with us. So the undergrad numbers are I don't have them because like the people that work with the internships, they would be tracking that more than I would because I don't work directly with the internship program. I'm not one of those select faculty members that does that. I teach and do research. I don't do the internships, but it's hard because the demand, supply and demand, right? Everybody wants to work, right? We all think it'd be great to work for a sport organization. And you even hear some people that say, "Oh my God, I don't know who would be, like I would love to work for the Minnesota Wild, or I would love to work for the Cleveland Guardians. I would love to work for them so much, I would do it for free." See, they know that. So you talk about salaries, right? And we have to get them to know right away that you're not making the salary that players are making. Your starting salaries are going to be low. You can work your way up, but a lot of students right away. I guess they've changed over time. When they graduate, they want to be in charge right away. Like, I want to be a general manager. Okay, how are you going to get there? I'm going to get my degree. Okay, but how are you going to? Why would I hire you as a general manager? Well, I'm good at fantasy baseball.
Bingo.
Not going to make you a general manager. So again, it's getting them to get a realistic career path. Sometimes it's hard and they don't like how that feels, but it's our ethical obligation. I consider myself to run aground of my ethical obligation if I just told every student you're going to get a job, because it's not going to happen. It's not going to, and I can't tell you that it's going to happen, right? Does that address what you're asking?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome.
that does.
I've got a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
One, if you get to New York, make sure you check out the new Jackie Robinson Museum. It's a nice job by the folks that put it together, even though if you know something about Jackie, you're probably not learning a lot, but there's so many people that don't know who he was and all his steps.
Yeah.
You mentioned Effa Manley.
Yeah.
Could she have sold Monty Irvin before Jackie Robinson to the Dodgers?
Say it again, I missed it.
You mentioned Effa Manley earlier.
Yes.
She kind of held back Monty Irvin, not trading him or selling him to the Dodgers back in like 45 and 46.
Yeah.
Could she have done that to change history?
Wow, that would have been amazing if that would have happened. Those were tough decisions, and so I can't weigh in exactly, except to know that it wasn't just baseball and the integration of baseball that hung in line. You all know this. It was the Black economy. It was a whole economic unit of Black hotels, Black restaurants, all of the economics that Black real estate that went along with when Jackie Robinson or whoever would integrate and the Negro leagues would start to lose players. That would affect all of those other industries. So I think that at the time, perhaps that was in her mind. How is this going to trickle down, right? And who is the right person? Is this the right time to do it? Because of course, as we all know, had he failed, it wouldn't have just been him. It would have been all of the African American society at the time, and how different that would have been. But she certainly stood up for, if you're going to buy our players, let's make it worthwhile here. She was above all a business person. She really was a very interesting business person, and also her side of standing up for social issues as well. I know she was very active in like the anti-lynching movement and other social issues at the time with the African American community. So I don't know that I've really answered it, but it's sort of my thoughts on what might have been going on. But
I think
think about how time think about how different it would have been had that choice been made.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's why I
think
wonder.
yeah, I think part of the issue, Mike, was that Branch Rickey was not going to pay for these players, and she was not going to let him steal her players. So he tried. She made it clear, "I will fight you," and
Yeah.
so that's probably one of the reasons that these are my assets. I'm not letting you just come and take my assets. And he knew
That's
that
right.
the Monarchs with the white owner fought it, he would look bad. And so, he's fighting a chance for allowing blacks to integrate baseball. And so I think that was part of his reason in targeting the Monarchs too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, to me, that's a story that nobody ever really discusses or talks about in the general sense. Here we're 3 days away from Jackie Robinson Day and all the great things that happened, but the Bill back in 42, Jackie wasn't going to be the first one until he was. So to me, it's a great educational, so I didn't know if you had danced around that before.
Yeah, but I tell you what, I read a really interesting book, and like I say, y'all are better historians than me because I come from more from the business side, but called Press Box Red. Has anybody read Press Box Red? Raise your hand if you have. Has anybody heard of Press Box Red?
no.
It's about the communist newspapers and how they agitated, is that the word? For integration of baseball.
Yeah.
And it is I picked up this book knowing nothing about that. It was a very interesting read, but it's called Press Box Red, as in, it's about a fella that wrote for the Daily Worker, I think was the name of the communist newspaper. But he was a sports reporter for the Daily Worker. And, so it talks about, well, how did the other, through the book, how did the other sports reporters interact with him, or which players interact with him in which ways. And it was a very interesting read, and it was a part of that whole integration story that I knew nothing about. So I think I found it on Amazon, right? Paperback. And I can't recall the author right now, but pretty sure it's called Press Box Red. So
there's a couple of books. One's called Major League Rebels. The other is called Baseball Rebels by a pair of California professors. One of them is Robert Elias. And the other one, his name has escaped me right this second, but it covers a lot of those topics. Talks about the IWW having integration as one of their main, picketing for integration, things like that. Covers a lot of those are in print and stuff. They just came out a year or two ago there.
Okay.
So those would be really recommended.
Oh yeah, and talking about like with the Daily Worker, how they had petitions signed to integrate baseball, and thousands and thousands of signatures on these petitions. Again, I just knew nothing about it. So it's always fascinating when you find these parts of history. We think we know history, and then we realize, oh, how much more there is. Keeps us going, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's kind of part of Fox Sports, where they started that back in the 90s, where the NFL really didn't exist before they broadcast it. They pushed that to so many young people. Yeah. I missed if there was there a question? I missed if there was. No, just the comment on how, the young people not knowing history, and you look at where Fox broadcast with the NFL, to them, they decided the NFL didn't start before 1993. It just started when they started broadcasting.
That's right. Yeah. As I like to tell my class, it's like, it's history if your professor lived it and you didn't, then it becomes history. Yeah. But I really am kind of almost appalled at how little some students know about history, but that's generational. So that's why I try to make this, like I said earlier, make history about the story.
I did live history at one point. We were teaching a Sunday school class, and this was probably 25 years ago, somewhere along there. And my wife dragged me into this. We need a man and a woman. It is a tough class. It was a tough 8th graders. They were tough. And so Linda always liked to start out the class. So what did you guys learn in school this week? Some kid said, oh, we learned about ancient history. So she said, well, what ancient history? Oh, the Vietnam War. I wanted to choke the kid. You know, first off, you know, I'm a Vietnam vet. That's not important, but I want to go choke him. I did not live in ancient history, but I was not allowed to do so. So yeah, I know what you mean.
That's awesome. You have to laugh, and you just have to laugh, right? You think about like when you teach in a class, the examples you're using, and you might give an example, and then I'll say, "Well, wait, I'm thinking y'all weren't born yet. Am I right? Yeah, I'm right. You weren't born yet." So they don't get and of course, when it comes to me in pop culture, you know, they can run rings around me on that.
Yeah. One of the questions I asked Adam McCulvey, who was a Brewer beat writer, it's a new question I'm adding to the repertoire. Is there anything you would like to ask us?
Oh wow, that is
We kind of hammer you at the questions. Hey, you can get even.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would say one of the questions I would ask is, you know, you've seen, I would ask this is self-serving perhaps, but, you know, you've seen what the course offers, you've seen a little bit. What else could I be teaching them? If you could walk into my classroom for a day and I would say to you, I would say, now, Mike, I can't, you teach, I can't, that would be, but Mike Carey, you had the questions, right? Or Tim, and you could walk into my class one day, Mary Shea, and baseball class is yours. What would you want them to learn?
I know. Do you teach about Bill Veeck? I would think you would have to.
I do. They get a lot of Bill Veeck in sport marketing.
Okay.
Yeah, and they read Veeck is in rec. I mean, yeah. So you would talk about Bill Veeck.
Absolutely, because you know he wasn't just, you know, obviously there's the funny part of it where he, you know, had the midget go up to bat and the exploding scoreboard and all that. But he was an incredible general manager, put together championship teams, you know, the 48 Indians and the 59 White Sox, and how he ran the Brewers. And just like you talk about students who they don't want to do the grunt work when they start out with these internships. And he started working at Wrigley, you know, selling peanuts and talk about working your way up. So he checks off a lot of boxes, and he's just fascinating.
Yeah, and like I say, I know that our main sport marketing guy, he's a total Bill Veeck fan. So I know they get a lot of Bill. So I talk about him some, but see, they would have already come into the class with a little of that. But I really hit the baseball stuff hard on that. But yeah, he is good. All right, Bill Veeck. Oh, yay! It gives me an idea. You just gave me an idea. I wonder if Mike Veeck would talk to my class.
He'll be at the SABR conference in Chicago in July.
You know, so maybe in 2 years I'm going to have to. I make a little folder 2 years in advance of ideas. So I'm thinking I might just throw Mike Veeck in my idea list. Thank you.
Well, he's got more time because he just sold some of his minor league teams.
Yeah, he'd be good. He would be great.
He does his Fun is Good. I don't know if you ever read his book, Fun is Good.
Yeah.
It's a fun book. So you can contact him there. I have a friend who is a friend of his, so I don't know. But you could probably, I'm sure you have ways of contacting him, and I'm sure he would love to be involved in your class.
I would find a way, even if my way is through Mary Shea, I'll find a way.
I can only ask.
And that's a good contact, Mary.
Yeah.
You know Peter Wilt, and Peter is a soccer executive, and he had Mike Veeck's son working on the startup of his last soccer team. So Night Train.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, and our head of SABR, Scott Bush, used to work for him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
So
great answer, Mary. That I'm after that answer, I'm thinking, God, I can't beat that one. I can't think of that. Was really good. Yeah.
That was good.
The one comment I would make on that is how sports, and I'm 57, so I grew up in the 70s, but how baseball and really all the sports were just minor business back then compared to the sports of today is, to me, the amazing thing.
Oh yeah. When you think about how what operate a lot of mom and pop operations early on, right? And now we're talking mega corporations. Who owns who? The naming rights deals, the sponsorship deals. where we're seeing sponsors show up now, even, watching this year and seeing the patches on the arms, right, and the uniforms. I was just watching the Marlins game before. They had a big old ADT patch on their arm. I'm okay with that. Like, some people are really offended. They don't like that. They don't want to look like European soccer. I'm okay. It's a space to sell if you sell it tastefully. They can't just put anything there, right, or make it too big. But the corporate money, right, that's involved now is we'll go back in time here. What would Kennesaw Mountain Landis have said about that? For crying out loud, or about bringing this, about the business of baseball and the business of sport.
Well, back then it was a goal of 1 million people to come to your baseball games. Now it's, oh, hey, if we're not doing 2.5 to 3, we're losing money.
Yeah.
And think back here, hey, who was the first baseball player to make $100,000 a year?
Ted Williams.
Willie?
No, I think it was Pete Rose, wasn't it? Was it Pete Rose?
Yeah, Pete Rose.
The first $100,000. And
He wanted to be the best $100,000 singles hitter. That was his goal. There were other players that were making more money, but they were different players.
Bob, you had a question, by the way. You have your
I was going
hand
to say,
up.
what's the major league minimum right now? Do you know what the major league minimum salary is right now?
$720.
Yeah, 720,000, and it's going to go up with the new CBA. It goes up to what, seven? It's a 4-year deal, 30, 40, up to 740, I think. By the time, or 780, I can't remember when it expires. Yeah. And
Bob, you had a question?
Yeah.
Actually, my hand was up for one reason, which was to answer your question about what you would like you to teach about. And SABR has a conference called the Analytics Conference, which is like a long weekend of analytics and things like that. And at the end of the conference a couple of years ago, Rob Nyer spoke. Many of you guys know Rob as an author and baseball intellectual. He's the commissioner of the West Coast League, actually, also. But he spoke and said, you guys learned a lot about ways to win baseball games and make your teams win. What my challenge to you is, what can you do with all this knowledge to make baseball better, to make the sport better?
Yeah.
So that would be the challenge I would also push out to your students. That what can you do to make sports better, baseball better?
That's a good question. We have a sports analytics class that we offer as an elective, and that would be a great question for them. So I'll have to let Dr. Coco, who teaches that, I'll have to float that over to him and see what he would say. Because we think about so much, how our analytics going to, affect the game on the field, but we think about the business analytics and what's going to make the game better off the field and make it a better product.
Anybody else have any questions?
I see another hand.
If I still have the floor,
You
could
do.
I ask you, I've heard you mention several times about working with disabled sports and disability, and I want to ask you specific kinds of things like that. I wonder if you'd have a comment to say, how does our increased consciousness about disability law, disability rights, the ADA, how has that affected sports and baseball in a positive way? What kinds of things have happened, can happen to give increased power to the disability community, or the differentially abled community?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is, starting at a young age, that we've seen more and more states that are passing legislation that will work with high school athletic associations that will help them establish, categories in, for example, like your state championships or whatever, in track or swimming, particularly in individual sports, it's easier for people with disabilities, so that we can compete. Whether it's just having an event or having a way to have more people involved. But redefining a couple of years ago, there was a Dear Colleague letter issued from the Department of Education, I believe it was, that talked about like sort of 3 ways that we can get more people with disabilities to play sport. One is that we can mainstream them, and that means taking a person who has a disability, but you don't really have to change the rules for them to play. So let's say you have a swimmer with one hand. Well, and they can make the time, they can make the team, right? They can try out. So think about, remember Jim Abbott, right? Jim Abbott. Yeah. So someone who can then be mainstream. There's also, should we start teams just for people with disabilities? So should we have a high school or a school district wheelchair basketball team where we get kids from different schools and put them together who have disabilities? And then there's also the idea of unified sports where you might have wheelchair basket or wheelchair rugby, and you have able-bodied and people with disabilities playing together because it creates more opportunity. And so, there are those ways on the youth level, because that's where you got to start. You got to get kids in chairs. You got to get kids on courts. You've got to get them, to see athletes with disabilities. We need more coverage of the Paralympic Games on TV. I don't know how many of you have watched any of the Paralympic coverage that was on the ABC or the NBC family of networks for the last Olympic and Paralympic Games. We need a lot more of that because people need to see, what these athletes can do, that they are elite athletes. I mean, I don't know, to me, being able to high jump 6 foot with one leg is pretty darn good. And some of the speeds, of course, that we see the runners and the swimmers that were at one point in history Olympic times. So getting the visibility, I think, is really important as well. So, getting kids in chairs or getting them, active, and then having the general public to see the sports and the athletes, and then also convincing more and more sponsors to invest because it is an investment. The disability sport community around the world, we are the 15%. 15% of the world self-identifies as having some sort of a disability. It's a pretty large group to market to. Now, they are not monolithic. They are very different. We are very, I say they, we are very different. But there are very few groups of people who are more brand loyal than people with disabilities. And if you think NASCAR fans are brand loyal, you ain't seen nothing compared to people with disabilities who are brand loyal, not just in sport, but generally. So I think that visibility, participatory wise, and getting to the eyes of the public are things that we can do, and things that I've seen happen over the years. And does that help? Does that address what
Yeah,
you
I think
asked?
so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the speed of advocacy is slow, and life, when we move at the speed of advocacy, it's as in things change gradually, as I like to say, as in gradually the ice age ended. Sometimes it takes a long time, but we stay the course. We stay the course. If it's 15 years to change a word, we do it.
Yep. Bill Miller, you had a question.
Well, I was going to make a suggestion. I actually teach a class, business and minor league baseball. I've been doing it for about 10 years.
Awesome.
And just one of the things I would say is the amount of changes we've seen in the governance structure of minor league baseball vis-a-vis major league baseball, and even the new collective bargaining agreement with minor league players. I mean, I took my class up to the Timber Rattlers game today up in Appleton and talking with some of their executives, just figuring out what can we do in terms of things that we all probably thought of as mundane. Can we use player likenesses on bobbleheads? What's it like putting together a baseball card set now when you're dealing with unionized players?
Yeah.
What are some of the things we can do in promotions? There's such a dramatic change in the structure of the game. And when we see the visible game and things like that, but behind the scenes, there's so many different questions just because of the collective bargaining. And again, the different structure of how the teams interact, with Major League Baseball. And we'll see that when these renewals of licenses come up in 10 years, and we're seeing it with the stadiums redeveloping. It's, we got lost in COVID. I think sometimes a lot of people didn't keep track of those changes, the dramatic changes we've seen in the minor league governance structure, ownership, and what they can do with the players. So I think that's coming around. At least you'll have visibility on it. I'm teaching in the middle of the storm because right now the CBA came out a couple of weeks ago, and I'm trying to teach on it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's one of those. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I think when you teach it next, you'll have some visibility on it, and hopefully we'll see that CBA. And so I would say that's something I think, probably should be covered in a course like that.
Yeah, and I bring in like guys from the Louisville Bats, and I brought in people from other minor league teams to talk about that. But again, it was all in process this semester. So actually, I think my minor league unit was actually done before the CBA everything happened. So, and again, that's when we teach classes like this and things change, we have to stay as up to date as possible. That class sounds great.
No, it's funny. I told them a lecture. I said, I'm going to give you a lecture now, but by the end of the semester, it may entirely change. I said, if so, we'll come back around.
That's and that's
We'll
all.
have to
That's
see,
what
we're
you
going
have
to
to
see
do.
what we'll have to see what happens. I said, I'll tell you what it is right now.
Yeah,
I said, but if everything changes, we'll come back to it. I said, you'll have the current knowledge by the end of the semester, or at least whatever it is at the end of the semester.
that's
And
right.
it's a challenge, but it's a fun part of teaching when we're in the middle of history.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said earlier, teaching in sport, we never have to make anything up. Everything happens for us, right? And then by the end of the semester, you got to get a great case study for them to work on, comparison points and what happened with the CBA, what got covered, what didn't get covered, what could still be on the table coming up next. Yeah.
Hey, Bill, where do you teach?
Yeah.
I teach at UW Parkside,
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Nice.
so I run the program down there.
Nice.
It's an elective. The class is an elective for us, just like Mary's situation. It's an elective for us. So we have a variety of electives they have to take, and that's one of them. Just like her, I teach it every 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's one of those. There's just enough demand probably to keep it going every 2 years.
Yeah.
See, for the UW system, we could actually audit that class if we're seniors.
Yeah.
I've had people do that. I've actually had.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah. I've
taught,
had people audit mine too, as well, because they have the same deal.
yeah, I occasionally taught
We're
baseball.
We're
This
running in
week,
on the hour and a half mark here, folks. Luke's got a hand up here. Let's get to Luke's question. Luke, what's your question? I think you might be muted also.
Yeah, I'm here. I've been listening this whole time. I thought it was quite interesting. Yeah, I know I'm young.
I know.
I was wondering
You're
if
in my class. Luke, are you in my class?
no, I'm
Okay.
a high schooler.
No, it's all right.
Yeah, I'm just quite into sabermetrics, so I've just been going into all the meetings Saber has to offer, because why not?
Awesome.
And I was just wondering if there's like any biometrical data that you use or that you've taught any students that can best infer business profitability of a certain person in the future.
That
Maybe
was,
fast.
I'm sorry. Keep going. I'm sorry if I stepped on you. What did you?
No, you're good.
I actually leave that to our analytics professor, who is a guest speaker in my class and comes in and talks about it. So we have a whole class on sport analytics, not just baseball, but across the board. And that's where our students will get a lot of that really specific information from that. And I mean, I'm a self-professed, I'm not a stat rat. I never was. But we have a lot of people who are, and good for them. And that analytics class fills up, and Dr. Coco's really great at it. So that's where we get that, we pass that information along. But a lot of that is, he does concentrate on the business side and not so much on the, there's so much on the performance side. But we talk a lot more about the business side. I know he does. And he came out of the financial industry as well. So he's got that background going for him.
Interesting.
Are you aware of the SABR?
Sorry?
The SABR, the list service that we have, the SABR.
No, let me look that up.
Reach out to. Are you from Wisconsin? Are you from another chapter? Where are you from?
I'm in Minnesota right now.
Okay. Let me get your name here, Luke. I will look you up on the profile. I will send you some information on the SABR. It's a list service where you can ask these type of questions, and there's people who know everything out on that site. It's scary. You never know who's going to answer, but there's always I just asked a question about the contact play in baseball. I hate it. Got a runner on third, no outs. They send them to route, and I've had 8, 9 answers out there. I'm not sure I understand half of them, but they all seem to make sense. So there's people there might be someone who can actually help you on that. So I will send you an email with some information on that, if that's fine.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Good.
Thanks for the question, Luke.
No problem.
Could have had an easier name here, Luke. Could have been, Luke Smith or something. No, make it harder. Make me have to write more.
was the intent.
You're a good kid. I like you. That's good. Okay. Any other questions, or Mary, any words of wisdom, and we can wrap up. We're about to closing in on 90 minutes right now.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thanks. This is really great just to have the opportunity to talk about baseball. And because I'm kind of, there's not a lot of baseball people like in our program. I'm sort of the baseball person, if you will. So it's always great to be able to reach out and to find people. So I appreciate that you all took the time, in the middle of the week, in an evening like this to welcome me, and I could feel the welcoming, even through Zoom. I could feel that. So that's really great. I appreciate it, Dennis, that you reached out to me and gave me this opportunity. So this is fun. I've been looking forward to this all. Hey, this is a whole lot better than grading papers, let me tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, you do a lot of that. Every time I talk to you, she's grading papers.
Although it wasn't bad grading today, because it was the baseball class's case study about international baseball, so it wasn't bad.
Oh. I would like to thank you. I saw this course and your coursework and all, and I like to have meetings on things that are different than baseball. We can do the usual, but classes and sports management, that's part of baseball. Just different pieces of the business that we don't normally see. It's not a player, it's not a manager, but and so this just lit up my beacon on, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And I have to admit that you definitely surpassed any idea. I had no idea what to expect, and this is really very, very good. I appreciate that.
Awesome.
I'm noticing Mike Hoppert's got an answer to the $100,000 question. The person who probably knows best. He said Joe DiMaggio, in the year that my much older twin brother was born, was the first to earn $100,000. He's got the contract files from the Hall of Fame, so he would know. So, but
solid. I love it. I love it.
So thank you, everybody. I appreciate everybody coming in. I'm going to turn off the recording as usual. If anybody wants to stick around and talk baseball, I'll be glad to stick around for a while, or have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
See you.
Dennis.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Dr.
Okay. Yeah.